acceptance. Diversity is acceptance.
Diversity is life.
Diversity is understanding.
Diversity is priceless.
Acceptance.
All people working together.
Infinite.
Unity. Most definitely unity.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a new time of day for us here at DLA. My name is Tandra Richardson, the Director of Student Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Phoenix, and also a proud DLA board member. This year, I have the privilege of serving as the new DLA Education Committee Chair. My committee and I are excited about bringing you innovative and forward-thinking DEI content and subject matter experts that will help impart change and move the needle on systemic racism. This is the year we raise our collective voices loud enough to drown out the hate. The time is now to have brave conversations that can turn stumbling blocks into stepping stones. This month's workshop answers the unyielding question for our society. How do we deal with difference? In other words, how do we deal with people who think and behave differently? Our presenter today will offer an innovative approach to this question through the emerging field of global inclusion. Now, before we begin today's DLA webinar, I would like to acknowledge and identify the Indigenous peoples, nations, and histories within our area. We acknowledge the Acumel, Udham, Pipash, and Yavapai. We acknowledge these people, their ancestors, their descendants, and the land itself. Before we dive into more detail about today's workshop and Bert's presentation, I'd like to bring on our Executive Director, Joanna Deshay, to tell you a little more about what we have planned for our annual conference this year. Joanna, welcome.
Wonderful, wonderful, and thank you, Tandra. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so used to saying good morning to you, so this is going to be a little new. We may stumble a little this afternoon. Tandra, thank you so much for the warm welcome and for the amazing work that you continue to do leading our DLA Education Committee. It does not go unnoticed. Here at Diversity Leadership Alliance, our goal is simple: to provide a safe and open forum for diversity, inclusion, equity, and social justice dialogue. As the premier diversity education organization in Arizona, we believe that organizations that understand, recognize, and value diversity can not only attract and retain top talent, but have a strong and competitive advantage in today's marketplace. Our 21st annual DLA conference is just that. It's a continuation of all of the great work we've been doing each month in hopes that we can turn difficult conversations into brave ones and turn stumbling blocks into stepping stones that ultimately will lead to change. This year's hybrid conference will be held from October 12th to the 14th, and we are happy to announce that today, the 2022 DLA and AZ Sherm Diversity Awards are open, right? So get your nominations in, get them in early. These awards we've been doing for the past 20 years, and they are designed to honor and recognize change agents in the community who strive every day to move the needle on social justice. So if you know an organization, if you know an individual, if you know a nonprofit or a governmental agency that is doing things in the DEI and social justice space, please nominate them. If you would visit the DLA website, we have a nomination form that's already up, and you can also, while you're there, download the sponsorship packet for the 2022 DLA conference. We are so grateful for all of our supporters, and they're the reason and the way that we do all of the work that we do. And Jackie will actually include the link in the chat area for you to download if you're interested in both nominating someone and being a sponsor of this year's conference. Thank you so much. You'll see me back at the end of the afternoon. I'd love to bring back Tandra right now to just continue talking about the focus of today's workshop. Tandra?
Thank you, Joanna. So as we mentioned before, we're going to be talking about the global inclusion perspective today. This is our 5th DLA webinar in our 2022 Brave Conversations series. Before we bring Bert on, we'd like to provide a gentle reminder that Diversity Leadership Alliance is a community space. And as such, we want to ensure that our programs and events are always inviting, respectful, and accessible to all. So before we get started on today's program, we'd just like to remind everyone about a few things. So also a reminder to everyone that our duty here at DLA is to keep this space safe and positive and productive. Listen actively and be open to the full spectrum of perspectives. Commit to foster greater empathy. Try to relinquish the need to be right. Ask questions and seek clarification for understanding. Be respectful to the presenter and other attendees. No one or two individuals should dominate a discussion. Approach each other with kindness and love. As a community space, we reserve the right to remove you from the discussion if you become disruptive. Now, I'd also like to offer a special thank you to Mr. Dave Wallenhop and his amazing team from Equal Access Services for the years of continued partnership and support. We value all of your time. So if you need to leave early, please save this survey link to share your thoughts with us. If you're able to stay to the end, it should launch automatically, and you'll find that survey in our chat. All right, let's get to the good stuff, and let's hear from Bert today. So the unyielding question, as we mentioned before, for our society is, how do we deal with difference? In other words, how do we deal with people who think and behave differently? To answer these fundamental questions, Mr. Bert Vercamer will guide us in recognizing the different approaches offered by the intercultural field, the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging field, and the social justice field, and how they are all related but very different. He challenges us to examine each in order to help transform the world around us. This workshop will offer an innovative approach through the emerging field of global inclusion, where together we can explore a model with relevant competencies and apply it to real-life situations. Please allow me to introduce you to today's webinar presenter, Bert Vercamer. Bert?
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me and having me over. I hope it's going to be innovative. I see the people who are here, a very impressive list, but I guess you'll tell me at the end if any of this was new or innovative, but I'm going to try my best. I'm going to share my presentation, and if I can maybe just have a thumbs up as soon as you can see it, I would appreciate that. Great, thank you, Joanna. Loving the energy. So yeah, I want to present to you today something more about global inclusion. The beginning of the presentation is maybe going to be a bit more sort of offloading of the foundations and sort of some model. And in the second half, I really want to get into some more practical stuff, get input from you as well, looking at some of your case studies, looking at the tools that you are using to see where might they fit within the model, and then have a conversation about its practicality. So I also want to start with the Indigenous land acknowledgement. And here I want to go beyond acknowledging that I'm in New York, the land of the Lenape. And for every presentation, I always donate $10 to the college fund. I encourage everybody else to do it. Easy URL. You might say $10 isn't a lot, but this is my fourth one this week. And so it definitely adds up. And I recommend everybody goes beyond acknowledging the land and doing something in some shape or form to also support some of these inequities. So the question here was mentioned now a few times. So we want to look at difference. And I do want to acknowledge before I continue that whatever you see today is something I developed with two colleagues of mine, Dr. Amer Ahmed and Dr. Joelle Brown. I am the facilitator today. I acknowledge my, I share my positioning, being a white male, gay, straight passing. It's Pride Month, yay. I'm also non-US born. I'm from Belgium originally. So I bring some of these perspectives. It means some of my identities are dominant. So it means that I have blind spots based on these dominant identities. And so that's where I'm coming from when I'm sharing all of this. At the end of the presentation, I'll come back to also Dr. Amer Ahmed and Dr. Joelle Brown, and also share how you can contact them. But I'm presenting essentially the work of the three of us. What are we going to see today? Roughly, I want to give an intro to understanding some of the oranges and challenges of the intercultural field and diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and social justice. Share some of the foundations of our model, acknowledging those that we built on, the shoulders that we stood on when we were developing this. Then I want to share the actual model, sharing the 7 steps and some of its competencies that we use. And then I'm going to share some of the tools that we position within that model, and I want to hear some of the tools that you are using and see if we can position them there, and also hear your case studies. I want to share with you a bit of the background why we are doing what we're doing right now. So together with Joel and Amer, the past 6 months, we developed a model around global inclusion. And it's an 18-hour training we're doing, and I'm giving you an hour and a half today. So the luxury was I had 18 hours to choose from. The challenge was, how do I still build a coherent story? So here and there, I'm going to shortcut some of my conversation, but I hope that I've put together a 1.5 hour session that's relevant, that's practical, and that you can do something with. I will share the deck afterwards, but I know there's also the recording with edited content where there's technical issues, and we'll go from there. I will share at the end as well, if you're interested in the full training, where you can sign up, but I built this as a 1.5 hour full-fledged session and workshop for all of you. Maybe some of the stories, where do I come from? What's my background? And why do we arrive at global inclusion? I started my career in this field about 20 years ago, initially working with a global nonprofit that's dealing with intercultural learning, so coming from the intercultural side. Did my studies in that as well. And the past 10 years became sort of a bit, it was sort of itching around, well, the intercultural field, which is more focused on global differences and that kind of stuff, stays neutral on power and privilege. And so there were shortcomings in looking at applying some of these competencies and these skills and some of that knowledge where, power and privilege needed to be included. So about 6-7 years ago, I started speaking to Dr. Amer Ahmed, and then started a conversation with Dr. Joelle Brown, who were itching as well, and we're coming maybe from the other side on diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. And we're missing some of the competencies that we also find on the intercultural side, or the focus we have there on competencies and that kind of stuff. And so looking at where these different fields are, which are essentially fairly young fields, I don't know, is there a progression? Is there sort of a next step that we can do? And the answer really, we thought, lied in bridging these fields. And the term that we came up with is the whole concept of the global inclusion, looking at the intercultural field and the diversity and inclusion field both at the same time. And maybe to give you one sort of wake-up moment that was interesting for me. So working with the more on the intercultural side and looking at this global nonprofit that had offices in 60 countries, they had 50,000 volunteers globally. And these volunteers were focusing on sort of two activities. One was actual exchange programs, high school exchange programs, and the other one was looking at curriculum for schools. So looking at, can we add some of this intercultural curriculum and dealing with difference to schools? And around a few global topics, and I'm talking about the refugee crisis in Europe, some of the environmental issues in Latin America, our volunteers wanted to get involved in some of these issues. But the intercultural field wasn't offering answers around the social justice topics, the human rights topics, etc., which really the intercultural field wasn't addressing. And that was my initial wake-up moment, working for the organization, supporting these global volunteer networks, that our material, our educational material, wasn't really offering any content. What I hear from my diversity and inclusion colleagues is that there was levels of frustration around, we're really good at the awareness building, but how do we go beyond awareness? Huh? And I'll address some of that later as well. That's where I'm coming from. That's how I arrived at global inclusion and how we're sharing now what we're sharing today. So I first want to get to know the audience a little bit. So I have a poll question for you. What field do you align the closest with? And I have 4 answers for you here. And normally the pop-up should show up right now. And I just want to get a bit of a sense of where you are coming from. The initial field you might be coming from. Thank you. So although Jean, I don't know how to pronounce your name, you say intercultural. We see most people here come from either the JEDI, DEIB. There's lots of different acronyms, right? Which for me shows already as an artifact the fact that the field somehow is evolving and there might be new ways of working. If we sort of struggle to get our right acronym, it's a bit like the LGBTQI2SA, the alphabet soup that's coming to exist, right? Also, a lot of people from a bit of both, and there's people who are not coming from the field, so coming from different areas. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to close this. So I underlined the word intro because there's a whole lot that we can talk about in terms of oranges and challenges. And I took a few of the bullet points, and please note the ... here as well in terms of talking about the origins and challenges of these different fields. So if you look at the intercultural field, a lot of the birth of that field comes from international business. For example, US-Asia. I think some of the founders we know here, Edward T. Hall, coming more from looking at the government relations as well, right? And in general right? There's different ways in which we use these fields. Generally has a lack of systemic power analysis. It's sort of more neutral on difference. So you might talk about different communication styles or different conflict styles. You're going to be more descriptive around these differences, not necessarily talking about how one might have more power, more privilege over the other one. So if you look at colonial hegemonic behavior, Western hegemonic behavior, it won't necessarily go deeper into that and be more neutral around these differences. Often focuses on national and ethnic identity, tends not to focus on intersectionality in general, right? So I'm just beginning to describe some of the origins and challenges of these different fields, and I'm definitely not exhaustive. If we then look at diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice, by design, I'm using all these different acronyms because there's not one necessarily that's dominant around these ones being used. There we see a lot of it emerged around the sort of US civil rights movement. So it doesn't always translate beyond the United States, especially, some of these terms, right? I come from Belgium, where we definitely have a racial problem. We might not always call it racial. We might call it sort of immigration or anti-immigration, not necessarily acknowledging the racial issue. And so these movements were seeking access, equity, inclusion, belonging, community, that kind of stuff. Often lacks a focus on skills competencies, often de-emphasize the individual agency, right? And so that's what we see sort of around origins and challenges. And again, ... there's a whole lot more where that comes from. But I just wanted to highlight that. And so I'd like you to drop in the chat. What challenges do you see in the current approaches of the intercultural field and the field of diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice? Thank you, Sarah. At all times, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Feel free to correct me by asking to be unmuted. So if you can drop in the chat, what challenges do you see in the current approaches? Thank you, Joanna. You know, going beyond performative, right? Going beyond the compliance check as well. Able-bodied or disability as an element of diversity. No leadership. We love that comment. It'll come back in sort of how we look at the model as well. Getting past the surface. So sometimes the do's and don'ts. Can we get past do's and don'ts? Can we get into more mindset? How do we deal with difference from a mindset perspective? Lip service. I think those are in the same realm in terms of comments, right? Going past performative, past the surface, beyond lip service. Yeah, I see. I'll critique the field I come from. You know, the intercultural field starting to use diversity inclusion terminology, but not really changing their models. You know, that's going beyond that's not going beyond the lip service in this case. Let's have a few more comments. We all have opinions. Come on, share them. We want to see them. Sometimes in these webinars, I feel like a radio presenter. I feel like I have to fill some of the space while people are thinking and typing and writing. I know some of us are more observers. Yeah. I'd like to have one or two more comments from people. White fragility, right? The paralysis we have around dominant identities, and they're like, oh, I can't say anything well. But there's also that paralysis that we have. The lack of recognition of the multidimensional part, so the intersectionality, right? It's not just about either race or gender or the politics part, the PCs. It's more about choosing the right words over actually changing things in action, right? Again, disability as intersecting with all of these, not doing anything because we're actually, again, paralyzed, and that's some of the paralysis we see around the diversity, equity, inclusion as well, is that the awareness and sort of the individuality of it, right? Well, I have 25 identities. Sorry, don't lump me in with X, Y, and Z because I am on top of that also X, Y, and Z, right? For example, I have a hidden disability. So privilege is that my disability is not hidden, is not visible, or the opposite. People don't recognize I have a disability. Yeah, white people and them not recognizing there's an issue, right? So thank you all for that. So I like what Marie said as well. We're more about the surface level diversity, and we don't really focus on the end goal of equity or belonging, right? Thank you for that. So great to know some of that input. I think we're aligned. I think we see some of these challenges. And so I'm going to share with you two brief case studies. And again, we're going to actually what I would like to do here is I would like to do 30 seconds of silence when you're reading the case study. And then if you can raise your hand and speak up. So we're not going to use the chat for this one, but have maybe one person look at case study 1 and one person look at case study 2. And in general, I'm looking at what is the dominant approach here? Is it more intercultural? And I'm going to do binary here. Is it more intercultural or is it more diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice? So not 3 of them, but 2 of them. What may be limitations here if you just choose one of these approaches? And how would you coach this person to be more effective? Okay, so case study 1 is coming up. This is going to disappear. So what is the dominant approach? What are limitations? How would you coach? And so I am going to leave that silence. So I'm not going to be a radio presenter and have you read this. Can't see my timer because of the screen, but we're 20 seconds in. Any of you would like to comment? And as Brent is saying in the chat, please raise your hand and then we'll select one person to speak up. And for a moment, I saw Liz raise her hand, but of course she was signing that she was raising her hand. So I won't call on you, Liz. We'll wait for somebody else to do the raise hand. I mean, you can, Liz. I'm not excluding you from the conversation, obviously. This is so meta. You know, Liz has to translate what I am saying about her. Anyone who wants to speak up?
I could call on people. I see familiar names.
Oh, and actually, I don't see all of the hostees in my video screen. So yeah, I'm gonna rely on you, Brent.
Chrissy, I see Chrissy there. It's good to see you. You want to say something? Let's see. We have Terry Middich.
So what is the dominant field here? Intercultural or diversity inclusion? What might be some of the limitations?
Bert, can you go back to the questions again, please?
Definitely. So the question really is, what's the dominant approach? Is it more intercultural? Is it more diversity, inclusion, social justice? What might be some of the limitations if you stick to one of the fields? And how would you coach this person to maybe go beyond? So and everyone, yeah, this is going to be attractive. I'm going to be calling on you.
So Bert, I'm going to go off on a limb. I'll start us off. I'll say, to me, it felt more intercultural. Because you're talking about colonialism, geopolitics, human rights, you know, as part of, you know, the settlement that you're in.
Yeah. And you're not really looking at some of the power dynamics, right? You're not looking at, here you might have a Syrian doctor who's now in a tent camp, but is being treated as, you know, an immigrant with no rights and that kind of stuff, right? So yes, you're very intercultural. Human rights is stepping a little bit into social justice, but not if you're not applying it, right? If you're sort of more on a meta level talking about human rights. So thank you for sharing that, right? So you're more focusing on maybe the psychological mental stage, you're more focusing on sort of some global dynamics, but you're not really going into some power privilege that is going on and not sharing any of that. So thank you, Brent, for sharing that. So those are some of the limitations, that you're not preparing your volunteers for that reality of who might be in front of you. Maybe you're talking about different communication styles. You know, yeah, you might be more direct communicator, they might be more indirect. Doesn't help in the reality of, again, you know, if somebody had a very broad life, high education, and now, you know, they're being stripped of all of their rights. How do you deal with that, and how do you manage that, right? So thank you for that. Joanna, I see you popping up on screen.
No, I didn't. And what I thought about is, because, you know, I was born and raised in West Africa. And so I'm very familiar with a lot of, like, you know, organizations coming in to kind of train volunteers. And the one component that I think is missing from this particular case study is the lived narrative of the individuals that are experiencing it. So while we can talk about colonialism, geopolitics, and human rights, the piece that's missing, right, is the individuals affected by it, right? When we're doing this kind of, you know, training, we oftentimes are looking at a very narrow perspective. And if it's not your lived narrative, right, if it's not something that, you know, you experience, it's very hard to articulate, especially when you talk about how they're going to arrive at the camps. You know what I mean? So I think that's the one piece that we always forget, is while we can talk about, from an orientation perspective, all of these topics, then you have to get to kind of the human aspect of it, which is those that are living in the space and experiencing it, right? So that's the one thing I think we forget. So that I just wanted to kind of share that with you.
No, I love it. And so the intercultural field is known to be more group focused, right? Let's describe overall groups, and we're sort of forgetting where the individual is. And that is definitely what is missing. Yeah, there's some sample stories, but it all feels very removed, right? It all feels very brainy in one way. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
And Bert, I'm going to bring Saray
Saray, bring it on.
to talk. So she's going to be able to talk. Hi, Saray.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you for this great session already, and you're just getting started. I was thinking this reminds me of just the need of trauma-informed training of volunteers, considering the conditions and also the stories and the very reasons of why refugees are going into these camps. And going into a little bit of what Joanna was mentioning and you also alluded to is making sure there's constant awareness of perhaps the humanity and the individuals, the personal stories, the background that they may be coming from, and treating everyone with dignity in that concept.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Saray. Yeah. And so I think we have one more person. Before we go there, I want to say it's an and story, right? Yes, we have to address the intercultural part, right? So yes, I do want to know that there's a different communication style. So at least I'm not judging you based on your different communication style. I want to understand some of the politics and colonialism and some overarching human rights. And I want to be ready to talk about power and privilege and marginalization and that individual story as well, right? So thank you. There's one more person, Brent?
Yeah, Clyde, we're going to bring you live to talk. And then after that, we're going to go on to our second case. So Clyde, welcome.
Yes, thank you. Glad to be here. And thank you for all this today. Not only just trauma, but I would also want to expand that too and cover the historical trauma associated with this, which delves a little bit deeper, excuse me, which delves just a little bit deeper, in my opinion, to the actual refugees that are there, which will also include their personal stories and all that, but how they got to this point, why this happened to them and stuff. So that's all.
Thank you so much. You might have heard the bell ring. I think that's an Amazon package arriving. The blessings of working from home, right? Case study number 2. So amidst the backdrop of Black Lives Matter, a consultant has been retained to support its employees. And I'll give you another 30 seconds. And you're ready now, right? We know now that we're going to interact. So I'd like to hear some new voices. Thank you so much for the first people to speak up. Okay, who would like to volunteer this time? Brent, I'm relying on you again to see raising hands among the attendees. There's going to be many hands raised now, obviously, right?
Well, we've got Clyde back. He's gonna start us off really fast.
I just want to hear some new voices.
All right, we're gonna hold off. I was hoping he'd break the ice for us.
Well, if no one else is coming, we'd love to hear from Clyde while somebody else is getting ready to speak up.
Well,
right?
I'm gonna call out Jake Riddle. Welcome, Jake Riddle. I know it's your first time. A little birdie told me that.
I appreciate how all of you are helping the interpreter to, have some rest right now.
Yes, we're only doing allow to talk because it's a much faster piece, so you won't be coming live.
Jackie's hand is raised.
Jackie, oh, excellent. I didn't, Jackie's on the other side. There she is. All right. Go ahead, Jackie. You don't need me to have you talk. You can just talk.
I know, but I want to play by the rules here. As I was reading this case study, there's just a lot of issues within this. And you said the black drop of back of what does all this have to do with Black Lives Matter? There's just a lot of other things happening in here. And when you talk about American culture, first of all, who's coming out and how are they defining American culture? Are you talking about white culture or Black culture? What are you really talking about? And are we calling that American culture? Are we really looking at American culture as a collective? So just the way this is, if I were a consultant in this space, we'd have to have some more information about what's happening right here. Anybody who would take this little bit and say, hey, I can handle it, I would be concerned as a consultant. I would be concerned about them calling themselves a consultant.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's just the first part, right?
Right.
So what we often see with interculturalists is, that more monolithic treatment of other countries, right? All these assessments of, country X is more, more that on the scale of hierarchy and that kind of stuff. So, most of you or all of you here being US American, what is American culture? Already in Belgium with 10 million people, we have really 2-3 different language groups. And so, can you even make these statements about what that is, right? So here we have a German automaker who's in its question itself needs some consulting around what's the real question that you want to have responded to, right? And then let's bridge now to the second part. Second part of this question. Can the same consultant or practitioner, can they address both issues at the same time? What do you think about that? Clyde, who was ready earlier, I'd love to hear you.
You're on, Clyde, as soon as you unmute.
Thank you. I'm here. The way I look at this, and I'm going to go back to the first part also,
please, is
that one, for me, a lot of people do not even understand Black Lives Matter. And then, because I am a historian by nature, I do realize that, especially in the nation of Germany, they themselves had to deal with a period of genocide, the Nazis versus Jewish people. And over there, it's part of their current culture. Plus, they had to reunify too after separation from World War II. That they educate their people on the Holocaust, or whatever they call it over there. And so that's a part of their history that they do not deny. They accept it, and they teach their young people about that. However, here in America, we have a culture of white dominance, so to speak, all the time. And that's the culture, white. Everybody else has to assimilate to them. And there's no change. And as of right now, we are having an issue with we're changing demographically more. And so that's been an issue there. And then the part about here about the whatever the tensions are they have, and if it is centered around Black Lives Matter, that's something that you'll have to explain and teach probably every person that's in that group. For each one of the groups, what the actual focus or goal of Black Lives Matter is, because a lot of people still don't understand what it's there for and the purpose. So this is one of those things I think where you have to just have that open mind and teach, and then add about going back to the first case study. All of those things are included. The historical trauma, if you want to toss in critical race theory, all that kind of stuff needs to be in here. It's just a matter, you just have to package it properly for people to understand.
Thank you. I think you're pointing towards that real complexity, right? And I think there's two layers here. One is, again, at some point here you need the skills around the intercultural part, right? Communication between Germany and US, but you also need the diversity, inclusion, social justice part, right? That knowledge and that understanding of how that operates, and again how different that is. And the other part here is looking at the ABC of training, the affective or mindset part. Where does this question come from? And what do they want to accomplish? the behavior part, right? How can we implement new policies, new ways of doing things? And the cognition part, so the historical part that Clive was mentioning, you know, having to share a lot of cognition and knowledge and history. And often, you know, these three are going together, right? I have to share elements of cognition and knowledge, history of, to then look at, well, how do you see all of that? Do you understand that you might be racist? Have you looked at your board, which might be while male dominated? What does that mean, etc.? So there's a whole lot going on. We have to do all the ABC of all of this. And then Jackie, you suggest that you would coach a person on doing an assessment to get the answers that would actually support the outcomes of the organization. So are they even asking the right questions, right? I think that's where we really have to start. So I just wanted to share with you some real case studies that Joel, Amir, and I have dealt with as we're looking at, you know, not one approach is really giving the answers here. So are there potentially new approaches? Thank you all for your input. And just so you know, there's going to be more of these questions of interaction coming. So this is where we want to look at, you know, combining the intercultural, the social justice, and the diversity, equity, inclusion. And I want to talk about the two foundational models that we looked at and that we thought were great and that each might have been missing just a little bit. I'm going to show a short video for each of these, but I want to share Catherine Sorrells, who comes more from the intercultural side, but looked at bridging, and so looks at the intercultural praxis model. And then Bobby Harrow, who comes more from the diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice side, and who looks at the cycle of liberation. But just now, let's have a short video clip. And
Bert, when you share, make sure you hit share the sound also in the bottom left-hand corner.
Thank you. Who doesn't want a Brent in their session? I'm going to share with you first a YouTube video. It's going to be about 3.5 minutes. Sometimes there's a commercial. I hope I went past the commercial and that you can get this without commercial. So this is a video. I sort of started 1 minute and 7 seconds to start just at the model.
Intercultural Praxis, developed by Dr. Catherine Sorrells, is a tool to help us better navigate these intercultural differences in ways that are ethical and just. This model represents a process that is cyclical in nature, with no real start or endpoint, so you can jump into it from any one of the 6 interrelated points of entry: inquiry, framing, positioning, dialogue, reflection, and action. Developing curiosity, a willingness to suspend judgments, and being flexible enough to expand your way of thinking are critical capacities of inquiry. Think about someone from a different country or someone whose racial or ethnic background is different from yours. Do you want to know more about them? Does the way they are different from you cause you to reflect on yourself? Expanding our frames so we can see ourselves, experiences, and the world from different perspectives is the next key goal. A frame focuses our attention so we see what is inside, but it also creates boundaries, limiting our view. Inclusion and exclusion is how cultural frames work. They help us see something very clearly and yet can limit our perspective. More intentional framing allows us to open up our perspective. Positionality requires that we consider how we are positioned in terms of power in relation to others. Our positionality is impacted by the socially constructed categories of difference, like race, gender, and class, that are not only personal, but are also institutional. For example, positionality accounts for women being paid 82% of what men are paid. Workers with disabilities also earn 87 cents on the dollar. So the gender pay gap affects all women, but a woman who is hard of hearing may face additional challenges. Dialogue in intercultural praxis requires interest, curiosity, and willingness to be changed. It means you're aware of how your experiences and worldview are limiting and could be enriched by others. While you may not agree with the other person, you want to understand their experience and their perspective. Dialogue emphasizes communicating with empathy, respect, and a genuine willingness to connect with other human beings. Thinking and reflecting gives you the capacity to observe and alter your perspectives and behaviors. Have you ever reflected on how your experiences have shaped you? Have you ever reflected on how your identity and belonging in various cultural groups impacts your experiences and your perspectives? Have you thought about the challenges and benefits of staying in difficult dialogues? Reflection is key to all the stages of the praxis cycle. In particular, reflection helps you act in meaningful, effective, and responsible ways. Consider how every moment in your day is an opportunity to engage in intercultural praxis. No matter who you are in relation to others, you can enact positive changes. Ask yourself, how can your everyday choices and actions play a role in confronting stereotypes and prejudices, building relationships and alliances across difference, and creating a more just and equitable world? The intercultural praxis model offers ways of being, thinking, analyzing, reflecting, and acting in a multicultural world. It provides a blueprint for using your knowledge and skills as an intercultural communicator. It's a guide to navigating difference that encourages understanding, compassion, and action, so you can be the glue that holds your diverse communities together.
And I want to thank Kilmar at Purdue University for creating this video together with Catherine Sorrells herself. And definitely want to acknowledge Catherine Sorrells. This isn't a session about the intercultural practice model, but people who are interested, there's definitely workshops. And so Amer, business partner, works with Catherine Sorrells often on doing these workshops. If you're interested, great model, and definitely recommend it. So the next model I want to share, and I have a short video as well, is Bobby Harrow's cycle of socialization and cycle of liberation. So I have a video about the cycle of socialization, and then I will share more about the cycle of liberation. So the cycle of socialization shows how we get socialized into marginalizing identities and that kind of stuff, and dominant identities. Cycle of liberation, how we can get out of it. So yet again, I will share video. I think this one has subtitles as well, but I'm not 100% sure at the moment. Okay, here we go. This is a shorter video.
Harrow's cycle of socialization can help us better understand the impact socialization has on both our biases and the systemic nature of oppression in our society. Although no one is born with biases, we are all born into a world with a lot of inequities and biases in place. Throughout our first socialization, our family and other caretakers pass on their biased worldview to us through their values, rules, and expectations. This process increases manifold once we are exposed to institutions, such as schools and general culture, like the media, among others. Through these channels, we are bombarded with direct and indirect messages about what's good and bad in the world. As children start interpreting these messages, they are constantly validated and reinforced through rewards and punishments, privilege and discrimination. Driven by fear and ignorance, many people continue the vicious cycle of holding up the status quo through their actions or inactions. Others are able to change the situation by questioning the status quo, raising awareness, and creating interruptions to the cycle of socialization. Let's take the example of Jamila. Jamila was born as Jamal into an African-American lower middle-class family. From an early age, Jamal perceived expectations around masculinity from the environment and also quickly understood that there was something unspoken yet problematic about being Black in America. By the time Jamal entered school, the expectations around gender identity became more and more explicit. From song lyrics to classmates, everything and everyone seemed to push Jamal towards a way of being that didn't quite fit. However, whenever Jamal tried to express who they really were, punishment in the form of violence and laughter brought back the feeling that there was only one way of being. Driven by fear and insecurity, Jamal kept up an image of themselves that created more and more self-hatred. Jamal started discovering a new world on social media. At the age of 19, supported by her community, Jamal decides to transition and become Jamila. Collectively, they are actively working to break the cycle of socialization and work towards a more inclusive and liberatory social reality.
So just introduction to these models. Let me go back to my presentation. Should be up now. So what you saw was the explanation of the cycle of socialization. This is the cycle of liberation, which I absolutely love. So I just want to look at the larger buckets here, right? The getting ready, the introspection, the consciousness raising, etc. Maybe there's something that happens that triggers you to do something, right? I think there's some societal examples, what happens around George Floyd, what happens around shootings, etc. We're getting ready. We initially have the intrapersonal part, so I'm working on myself. And then we get into the reaching out, the interpersonal part, and the idea of building community. So working with others, maybe people like us, people different from us, etc. And we look at coalescing. So coalescing is looking at organizing, the lobbying, we need funds, etc. And we start, looking at really creating change. So it's about critically transforming institutions, creating new ways of being, creating a new culture, and really also addressing it systemically, all while making sure we keep the core of ourselves, the self-love, self-esteem, the balance, and taking care of ourselves. A lot going on, and I love how it is put together in just one of these models. So that's what I want to share, sort of foundational things. Just want to share a little bit about what do we like about these models. And by we, again, I mean Joel, Amer, and I. We love in the Intercultural Praxis model how they focus on action, how they focus on framing and reframing, perspective taking, how, going beyond the golden rule. The golden rule, we know from lots of religions, do unto others what you want to be done unto you, changing it to the platinum rule, do unto others what they want to be done unto them, right? So that from sympathy to empathy, and already has some focus on competencies. We think it's light on community and group orientation, and I think it's light on leadership, and it's light on systems. Doesn't mean it's not there. We think it's light on it. What do we like around the cycle of liberation? We also like the action orientation. We love the community focus. There's focus on systems as well, focus on leadership, taking care of self and others. And it does mention power, privilege, marginalization very explicitly. Again, doesn't mean this one is not mentioning it, but we think it's more explicit and it's there. We think it's light on perspective taking and framing and doesn't have that intercultural lens that includes also more competencies. So, but these are two models that I think we are really good. Some of you might know some of these, one or the other or both. And this is sort of what we built our own model on. Let me then talk about that model, right? I keep mentioning it. I have a few slides to look at this, but this is the model, the global inclusion model, that you'll recognize some jargon from the two previous models and that we think is addressing some of these issues. So the 7 steps are in white, inquiry framing, the competencies are in sort of that brown-black, and we want to be competency focused. We want to work towards us having more curiosity, us having more self-awareness, because we can measure those. So whatever intervention we do, we can measure it against any of these competencies. And there's plenty of assessments out there, and we are developing our own as well around this. And that's the model I want to talk a little bit about. What does it mean? How can it be helpful? And I then also have a question around you. What current tools are you using? And I'd like to bring that in here. than the tools that you're using as well. I'm going to address the question that's coming in here. What about working with a diverse age group? That's one of the identities within here as well, right? So if we do perspective taking, look at the framing or the recalibrating, how do we judge different age groups? So any of the identity groups can be brought in here in this model. So what are these different steps? I talked to you about 15 competencies and then 4 considerations. I'm only going to bring in 1 consideration per step at this moment. I think that's what we can address within the time frame that we have. And I took the consideration that I think talks most towards this step. I want to go beyond just the word inquiry, understanding, what does that mean? So at the inquiry stage, we're going to look at what's happening and who is involved. We're going to describe everything, right? What are the different relationships? What are the identities that can include age? I want to address Paul's question here. Intersectionality of these identities, relative power, privilege, marginalization at the inquiry stage. So it's about being curious, about being self-aware. And as a practitioner, of course, I bring in my own identities, right? So how I look at things, I have to bring in my positioning as well. The next one is framing. So beyond describing, we have to understand that everybody's cultural lens, privilege, marginalization, and worldview impacts how we understand what has taken place and will impact how we want to resolve it, right? So if I just keep my diversity lens, if I just keep my intercultural lens, I'm gonna grab the intercultural tools and the diversity tools to try to resolve this, right? If I just keep a race focus, if I just keep a gender focus, if I just keep an age focus, I'm going to only focus on that. No, we need to look, well, we need to understand that's where we're coming from. We might have an expertise there, but all of it is needed. So we need empathy towards what we don't know, and we need to allow ambiguity for what we don't know. Ambiguity to me is the art of not knowing. And that's definitely a book I'm going to write at some point, so nobody steal it. Ambiguity or the art of not knowing. And no, I'm more a collaborator. So if somebody wants to write that book with me, I'd love to do it. So at framing, we have to allow for empathy and tolerating ambiguity. And the bad thing with these webinars is I don't know if any of you are laughing with my potentially tacky jokes, but here we are, hoping that you do. And if not, you can laugh at me. It's fine. I can take it. The next one is recalibrating. So now we've done the inquiry and we sort of mapped everything out. We've been curious. Now we framed it and reframed it and we're empathetic. Let's look at recalibrating it, right? Let's look at a systemic analysis in this case. What are the structural issues here, the interpersonal, political, and symbolic inequities that we might have that impact all of this? We have to have patience, we have to be very critical, and especially here, we have to understand our own lens as a practitioner, as a consultant, where we might need to bring in other people if need be, or do a strong collaboration or co-learning element at the recalibration stage. Coalescing, sort of removing from more sort of analysis of where we are to sort of more maybe solution-oriented phase. This is where we're going to go into community building. The community is going to be very important now. Who's been harmed? Who has harmed? Can we bring those people together? What does it mean to bring those people together? What power privilege is involved in doing all of that? Are we sustaining power and privilege by doing that? Let's try not to do that. So looking at what are people's motivations? What are the goals here? It was Jackie who has mentioned, at this point, I would actually do a survey because we even have to look at the motivations of this company or what they're trying to do. This includes having difficult conversations, and it includes creating safety for any of this as well. Let's go now beyond this, and now we look at strategizing. So let's do collaborative inquiry. It goes beyond the consultant knowing it to the consultant facilitating a process. We have to address the individual issues, the interpersonal issues, the institutional issues, and the structural issues. We have to address all 4 of those at the same time. We can't stop at one. There's different pockets that influence each other. There's a Venn diagram we have to look at, and we have to look at change making, right? How will we now really bring that change and bring in design thinking from a competency perspective? This is where leadership comes in. a model, and there's as many leadership models as there are MBAs, because everybody wants to frame their own leadership model. I hope I got a few laughs out of that one. That was again a little mini joke, right? So what are my leadership challenges? Where am I strong as a leader? Where do I need others to join in my leadership, right? Where do I empower others? What agreements do we have, and do we follow through on those? I think early on people were mentioning some of the challenges of any of these is, do we go into action? And once we have action, do we go into following up on that action? And thank you, Jackie, for giving me a little lull. I need it now and then. Thank you. So that's where we have the self-actualization and the empowered leadership. We go into adapting. So do I observe impact? Is it doing what it's doing? I think there's too many examples of us being well-intentioned, implementing something, and it doesn't really have the impact that we wanted. Are we observing that? Are we adjusting expectations, our actions, and are we self-caring? Do I take care of myself? And do I now show adaptive leadership? And while I sort of presented it from a linear place, I had to start somewhere, right? But maybe in your case, you're going to start from community building. Something has happened. And before we can even do an inquiry, people don't want to talk to each other. Let's start with some community building and some healing. Maybe then we can move to a framing place. Maybe only then we can go to an inquiry place. So this isn't linear. You can start from any of these places. Sometimes it happens that a new leader comes in. Only then some healing can happen. So we have to start a leadership, right? We have to have the right leader before we can start any of these different things. And so in sharing that model, we wanted to address some of the issues that we saw in some of the other models, but really building on those as well. And you might see we use some of the jargon from the previous models, and I think we wanted to build some more comprehensive model. I want to pause at this point and see if there's any questions so far before I continue on some of the rest of this presentation. Any questions about what I've presented so far? And maybe I've stayed a bit theoretical, but I hope I offered some application as well of where we're coming from around some of these fields. So what are some of the questions you have? And use the Q&A, and then they're going to feed the questions to me from there.
Currently, we do not have any questions in the Q&A. So either you can move on or we can pause for a moment. If someone wants to raise their hand, we can make you allowed to talk. You can't just talk on your own by unmuting. Just so you know, in webinar version, I have to click a little button for allowed to talk.
Brent, this is
so Jake,
I'm sorry, there was a question in the Q&A about, but it was related back to the question about using age. It was in the one scenario that you did, Bert. So there was a question in the Q&A saying, well, if we don't know this, how are we going to solve it? So I think it was just getting back to, if you wanted to respond or something about just not having all the information that you need to move forward. So it was a question around that about why was age not included in this? So related to that.
Okay, why was age not included? We came up with some scenarios that included some identities. Like I said earlier, I can easily describe 2025 identities. It's not that we're excluding it intentionally. It's more that, it's a non-exhaustive case study in which we don't bring in all the identities. We have one slide to describe a case study. We're not being intentional. Thank you for bringing it to the surface. It's not intentional. It's just not a non-exhaustive listing of various identities. Yeah. We also didn't mention gender. I think that there's many that we didn't mention disability.
I'm going to say move on, Bert. Let's continue on. Remember to put your
either I'm amazing at explaining it, or I'm boring you to death. I don't know which one, or it's not a binary. Anything in between. If there's any questions, of course, you'll let me know. You don't have to wait for me to reach out. So I just wanted to put the full model in there, so you have it on one screen as well, in case you want to get back to this. We have 4 considerations for each of these steps. I'm sharing one with you for each of the different steps, and then you have the 15. Okay, so We also have looking at different interventions per step. So one of the things that we wanted to look at, where Joel Amer and I are working with either higher ed or government or nonprofit or corporations, is, when do you do what intervention? And so, I want to talk about a few of these interventions that we all know. And so what it helped us a lot, and we almost first developed it for ourselves, looking at, when we go in with a client, what do we do? And one of the things, obviously, is not questioning the client, but sort of using the word questioning as an objective thing. What does a client really want to reach? Because they might need some support around questioning. Be like, okay, you have an issue, you're asking us this question, but what is it really where you want to get? I think Jackie was hinting to that as well. And then once we have established what we really want to get to, what's now the end goal, and hopefully that is related to equity and belonging, rather than we just want to performatively come across as having done our job and being more diverse. We really want to get to the access, to the equity, to the belonging. What interventions do we do? And then for us, it was very helpful to look at the interventions and listing them per step. And so in the broader course, we have about 20, 25 interventions that we list here and there. And so I just want to ask you, where would you position, back to you, where would you position unconscious bias training? Where would that link here in the step-by-step model? What step would unconscious bias mostly fit in? Not that it fits in other steps, but where would that fit in? Mm-hmm. So Jake is mentioning inquiry. I don't want groupthink. So let's have some other responses as well. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I just want to have a few responses before we go in. I want that reflection maybe. So unconscious bias training. So we see inquiry, framing, more on this side initially. What other responses might you have? This is our workshop, not just mine. So I'll wait for one or two more responses while the reflection.
Do we want to go live with someone to speak their answer? What do you say? We have somebody.
If somebody's open to it, yes, definitely.
All right, Janie, I think I said that right. You're on. Welcome. You need to unmute though.
Thank you, Victoria. Are we calibrating?
Janie, you're allowed to talk right now if you want to unmute. Okay. We'll come back if you want to raise your hand again later on. That'll be great.
So Joel Amer and I positioned that more in the framing part, right? So going beyond just describing identities, really going into acknowledging some of the perspectives that we come with and the biases we might have. It definitely also falls under the competency of awareness, self-awareness and awareness about others. But we think it's somewhat more around the framing and the empathy and acknowledging that what we describe might be biased. And so at the framing stage is where we would have generally that that part. Oh yeah, I'll put up all the things as well so you can read some of that as well. So that's generally where we put it. Doesn't mean that this is not a black and white, sort of more like a gray zone. The second one is this one might fit in a few actually, but what would be sort of an interesting time or an ideal time to bring in another consultant? You recognizing that you might not have all the answers and you need that other consultant to come in as well. There might be two spots where it fits. I put it in one, which doesn't mean it's ideal. But where would you put bring in another consultant as an intervention? If I can see some answers in the chat, adapting. More at this step. Thank you, Marie. Let's hear from some others. Recalibrating or strategizing. So over here. Yeah. Coalescing.
Bert, when you're saying over here and over here, can you please say what you're talking about? Because someone who's visually impaired would not understand what that means.
Definitely. I'm just pointing out what's coming up. So when the coalescing shows up, I sort of point my arrow at coalescing. When strategizing comes up, I'm pointing my arrow at strategizing.
Great, thank you.
Leading, coalescing, recalibrating, so we're in a different sphere, right? So we're more on the left bottom side of the model. We put it generally around the coalescing strategizing, right? So after the coalescing or at the coalescing stage, realizing that for me with my identities at the community building healing phase, I might not have the trust based on my identities. I might need to bring in somebody who has identities that are closer aligned to the one who have been harmed, for example, right? And so that's sort of the phase or the space where we might want to acknowledge that we need somebody else to come in as well. So at that left bottom side, and I'll give descriptors of where that space is. So thank you for that. So we were all around this space, sort of recognizing that is where we might want to do that. And we see that as an intervention, right? On a meta level, but bringing another consultant, that is really where we want to be. Where might you bring in the identity wheel? We all know the identity wheel, and there's, again, as many versions as there are D&I consultants. Where might we bring in the identity wheel as an exercise for people? Where might we do that? And I love how there's more and more answers. There's more and more interaction. So let's have a few of you respond in the chat as well. The identity wheel, would we bring it in at inquiry, framing, recalibrating, coalescing, strategizing, leading, adapting, or any of these places? And thank you. We have a first response come in. Victoria gets a gold star for giving lots of answers. We love it. So inquiry is what we say. I don't want to have groupthink, maybe I shouldn't even say it out loud until I have a few answers. Let's have a few more. There we go, Victoria. And I know some of you are sort of observing, sitting back and taking it in. This might be new for you. Jonathan agrees with Victoria. Do you want a gold star as well, Jonathan? If you're the second one to respond, you'll get one as well. Clyde says inquiry. Yes, I think this is an obvious one, right? The inquiry stage is where we're going to do the identity wheel, just to get aware of the different relationships, the different identities, etc. So that's why we generally would do the identity wheel. Again, not being linear, you can do it at, you can come back to it, right? Inquiry never has to stop. We can continue with inquiry at various stages as well. The next one is a climate survey. Where might you do a climate survey? And this one we actually put into two spots. So where might you do a climate survey? We're all reflecting, we're observing. Jonathan, you definitely earned that gold star if you're the first one to respond now. And then maybe Victoria can agree with you or not. I don't know. So where would you bring in a climate survey? Strategy and framing, adapting. Adapting is what I read.
Oh, you made Jonathan want to talk. I'm bringing him in.
Strategizing. Jonathan, yes. You want to comment?
Unmute yourself, Jonathan. You're good to talk. Welcome.
Oh, it was an accident.
Oh,
I hit the raise.
Oh, now you have to
button,
say something.
But since you got me on the spot, I just wanted to say that I really appreciate what you're doing and this that we're having this discussion.
Great, thank you. So again, a climate survey, depending on the purpose, can fit in many different ways. We think it's a great tool at the inquiry stage and at the adapting stage. So I kind of put it here, but it's meant to be between adapting and inquiry. So you can start with a climate survey. You can start evaluating at the adapting stage, but yet again, based on the purpose, you can do a climate survey at any of these different steps. They're a great tool, but often they're misplaced because we don't really know what the goal is of the climate survey. And engagement, involvement of others doesn't begin and end with the climate survey. It's also what we do with it, what goal do we have with it. But we think it's a great tool for evaluating or observing impact. Then, looking at did the actions do what they need to do, etc. The next one I have, and it gives it away a little bit if you read well, is design thinking. So design thinking is the innovative approach of creating new things, creating new processes, new services. My accent comes through now and then, or creating new products. So what design thinking is the process that where would that be? And so I'm not sure if Paula responded to the previous question or to the new one, strategize. It's right there, right? But yes, we think design thinking is a great step at the strategizing phase, because those of you who know design thinking, it's really about who do you invite to the table, right? Which you can really only do once you've done that community building and healing, right? Because you want lots of different voices at the table. Now, I know I can really only be creative and innovative when elements of healing have happened, when I feel like I have a relationship with others, right? When I've gone beyond maybe the judging or understanding I've done the harm and that kind of stuff. So design thinking as a tool is really something that would be very welcome at the strategizing phase. I want to hear, those are the 5 I wanted to sort of put on there. We have a whole lot more that we work with, but as you see, the real exercise here is being intentional and conscious of what do I do when. And I think the identity wheel and the unconscious bias training is a lot of stuff we know. But if we don't go beyond that, we haven't done much. We've done some awareness building, but we haven't really gone beyond awareness building into lots of this other stuff that we need to do as well. Identity wheel or unconscious bias training isn't really doing community building or healing. If anything, it brings more paralysis if you want to, if you don't move beyond that. So I want to hear from a few tools that you might be using, or you've been part of it, right? You've been a recipient from, some intervention, some D&I consultant intervention, or some intercultural intervention. And you're like, where might that fit? I want to try this on, right? And it's really, I want to say 7 times and, I'm not going to do it, but it's an and, all of these steps need to be addressed. So it's about having a variety of tools that you apply in any of these different moments. So either you can raise your hand and then we'll have you speak, not by accident. I'm teasing you, Jonathan. Or you can drop it in the chat and we can discuss, where might that tool fit in? So what tools have you used? What tools have you been a part of that you might want to put in here? Not all at once. But yes, Heather wanted the break as well. Last time Liz got the break in interpreting language and sign language interpreting, and now it's Heather. I'll give a moment. Love the facial expressions, Heather. No tools. We've never been part of any intervention. We haven't had tools. Nope. My sarcasm is gentle. It wants to invite. Let's look at leadership coaching, right? So Dr. Anish Nadir, you've been mostly involved and engaged in awareness building. I'd happily invite you to speak up and see if you have any examples of the awareness building, but I don't want to put you on the spot. So you're also very welcome. So raise your hand. You can do that at the bottom. You can do reaction. So unconscious bias.
We have Jake.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, we have Jake that we're gonna bring loud to talk. Jake, unmute. Welcome.
Working this time.
It is. Welcome, welcome.
Fantastic. Sorry about last time. I did hear you, but I'm not sure why my microphone wasn't working. I am a manufacturing manager in a small metal manufacturing company, and we've just started doing a lot of unconscious bias training. And what's interesting is I'd say, I have 120 employees that work under me, and probably 95% of them are white males, growing up on farms or in the suburbs around Minneapolis. And, we've, obviously all the interesting George Floyd stuff happened past couple of years, and it's been a lot of interesting opinions around here. But so we've gone through, the identity wheel is, I've never heard it being framed as that, but that was some training that we went through recently, right? We just had our unconscious bias training. And something that was shocking to me is, not shocking, I shouldn't say, is that a lot of us didn't even understand what our own culture was in the first place, and it was such an interesting tool to go through and have conversations with my supervisors and my shift leads. Like, what did you get away from that? What did you learn about yourself, even, right? And it's, I'm white. I always feel like I'm being attacked. I'm like, whoa, what do you even know about yourself? And then now that you understand this about yourself,
yeah,
you maybe understand, what their culture potentially is, right? So that was a really interesting one that I don't know, had a pretty big impact around here.
Great, yes, and it's at that inquiry framing stage, right? The question is, what will we do with it, right? Have we looked at systemic issues, right? Have we looked at systems thinking? There's 14 ways of system thinking, which is another tool that you can look at. Have we then gone into community building? Have we built competencies? Because awareness also can bring a lot of paralysis, right? I can also be paralyzed around my own. Like, oh my God, I now realize what white hegemony has meant, and that kind of stuff. So again, can we go beyond? And you might see this is also the shape of a flower. What seeds am I planting for later stages? What's germinating? And so what growth are we building by really addressing the 7 steps? But great that you've been doing that inquiry and that framing, that people have been open to it. Yeah. Thank you for speaking up. Anyone else who wants to speak up or share some more? So Jonathan, you're mentioning unconscious bias training. So the courageous conversations, or the more that community building and that healing, right? That coalescing part, great, yeah. And then do we follow it through, right? Do we have an action plan? Do we follow up? Do we adapt based on realities, et cetera, et cetera? Anyone else wants to share some tools? Okay. So another question I have, sort of one of the last reflections, hearing from you a bit of what stands out about the model. I'll put up the slide again immediately. What stands out? What appeals to you? And what questions do you have? Let's have a conversation about it. Let's open it up. And I'll drop the questions in the chat, right? What stands out? What appeals? What questions do you have? Any and all. Dr. Anish is referring to the names of the various tools and the strategies. Yeah, definitely. And so Joel and I are working now with about 15, 20 and counting, right? Really looking at what are the different tools out there? How do we frame them within all of this? And definitely wanted to touch on a few of these here as well. Anyone else? What stands out? What appeals? What questions do you have? I'd love to hear the opinions. You can either raise your hand and Brent will open that up for speaking, or you can drop it in the chat. Well, actually, I said I was going to bring up the model, so I'll just put it here, right? What questions do you have? So Victoria is sharing that she loves to see it all come together. You've seen it separately. Yeah, that's sort of that's how a model can be helpful, right? Models are never perfect, but it kind of helps to frame a bit, you know, what are we doing? What direction are we going? What might we be forgetting, right? Paula is pointing out that we might not know we have a bias until we point it out, right? And that's where the framing phase is very, very important. Jonathan appreciates the completeness. We want to call it the next progression. Again, we're building it on existing models, people who have done stuff before us. But we do hope it builds on that and sort of, you know, makes it a bit more holistic, especially I think the systemic part, the solution part, and the leadership part that we often see missing in models. And you know, I was going to throw out one other tool we often do, or you know, in inclusion work, we're like, oh yeah, let's do some leadership training, right? But leadership training without, you know, again, looking at the fuller picture, you know, where is the leadership needed? So is it intervention pre-strategy? Like I'd love to have my leader be developed around sort of looking at difference. Let's say the intercultural development inventory, the IDI. Some of you might know that tool, right? Assessing where somebody is being more ethnocentric or more ethno-relative. Why do we do that and where do we do that? We might want to do it pre-strategy because I want my leader to be more ethno-relative when they're developing the strategy. Or we can do it post-strategy because we want the people within the system are going to change the system, right? So now I want the people who will help implement the strategy to be more ethno-relative when they are implementing the strategy. You know, and Dr. So Paula, so you recognize yourself in it, right? You can sort of relate to it, is I think what I hear you say, read you say. Dr. Anisha, the tools or strategy depends on the community or the population, definitely, right? So there's a plethora of tools out there. It sort of doesn't stop. And then, you know, is it more about the dominant identities? Is that what you're going to work with? Is it more about marginalized identities, a combination thereof? What marginalized identities, right? And each of these will have different approaches and different tools, definitely, yeah. I want to see if there's more comments, more questions you have. How and where do we learn more about the tools, which work best and when and where? So we wanted to touch on something here, share the model. I do want to do a shameless plug for the work that Amir, Joel, and I are doing. So we do have a website, global-inclusion.com, and we do offer training where you can enroll. And if you would go to our website and look at the enroll section, you can enroll there. Whoever comes from DLA has a $200 discount for our training. You can choose a category below the category where you are. You know, we have a corporate rate and we have a nonprofit rate and an education rate, and you can choose a rate below you. But that's sort of a shameless plug here. But we do want I do want this workshop to be self-sufficient for you to get started and sort of do your own assessment and your own work. But Joel, Amir, and I are offering a training around this and do more work around this. Like I said, we have an 18-hour training. I have an hour and 15 minutes to sort of address it here, and want to sort of have something self-sustainable and self-explanatory here as well. But you can work with us as well. You can reach out to any of us individually. So I want to share some more here as well. So thank you for that segue, Dr. Anish, for me to go there. But this is where you can also learn more. Feel free to reach out to me. Very happy to support, help, any questions you have.
All right, thank you so much, Bert. Questions. We have no questions right now in our Q&A.
That was amazing, by the way, Bert. I'm sitting here taking notes all feverishly. Then I forgot I had to come back on. I was like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be saying something. So thank you so much for that. I wanted to ask a question, and I'm glad you have this kind of approach up here. where do you feel like, or is there a place that this aspirational, idea we have of belonging, is there a place that this fits in? I would love to hear just sort of your perspective as you were talking about this approach. I just wondered, where does belonging fit in all of this?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I'll give you my opinion. I'd love to hear from others as well. So to be frank, this is kind of the easy work, right? The left-hand side work, the inquiry framing work. And that's where we see a lot of the sessions, the performative, where we stop at, at the 1.5 hour unconscious bias training. Let's have everybody go through the unconscious bias training, right? And let's HR, can you put that in the system? Who was present? And so, let's now have the annual report go out and off we go into this, right? That creates zero belonging. If anything, it creates paralysis. I've been using that word again, right? It is where we have some of the white fragility, all of that stuff coming out, right? It's not really, I think, constructive or building. Very important foundations. It's exactly what we need, right? But so the belonging for me happens on this side, on the left-hand side, and it really starts with community building, right? The community building and the healing is where I'm going to feel like you're going to start listening more to what I am. Now, belonging comes from two different things. It comes from acknowledging socialized differences, right? So if I am socialized, it's not my personality, I'm socialized into being more emotionally expressive. But corporate culture, which, as we know, is framed on white, straight, male identities, right? Where I've learned not to show emotions, etc. But I need emotion. For me, emotions are data. It's how I've been socialized, right? If you don't show emotions, I don't feel like you're engaged. I don't feel like whatever you're saying is not backed up by your emotion, right? And I'm going to bring in race here. So if we let's look at church, right? White church will be generally more quiet, very formulaic, etc. I think we know generally, and I'm generalizing, the answer and call, the emotional expressiveness of a brown and black church, and this is the white guy speaking here. So we have more of a culture of emotional expressiveness on the black and brown side, but here that person enters a workplace where corporate culture is more, can you please calm down before we have a conversation? Like, excuse me, emotionally expressive is part of my identity. I don't feel like I'm authentic if I cannot emotionally express myself, right? Now, we can sort of look at our conscious bias on the inquiry framing side, but belonging happens if I am acknowledged and I can emotionally express myself without being judged, right? That's around these socialized differences. Secondly, belonging around my social inequities, right? Excuse me, but if year in, year out, I'm a female in a meeting room and all I have happened is that my male colleague 10 minutes after I said it repeats what I just said, real life, right? Real life. Excuse me, I don't feel like I belong. If my mediocre, white male colleague, lots of great non-mediocre white people, right? But if my mediocre white colleague gets promoted again over me, because there's a maleness and not a femaleness, I don't feel like I belong. So to what extent can we acknowledge both our socialized differences and not be judged for it and live our authentic self at the workplace? To what extent do we acknowledge social inequities? That's happening over here. That's happening, that starts at the community building healing and continues around changing the climate, right? Let us change the corporate culture. Let us acknowledge that indirect communication has value around harmony seeking, more collective stuff happening, right? That emotional expressiveness is needed and all that kind of stuff. That belonging part happens over here, and that's a really difficult part. And we see how the acronym starts changing, and we're now adding belonging, but we're going to keep diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. Oh, let's throw in the A, or the X's. We're going to throw in A as well. Let's throw in social justice, S and J, or just the J, justice, right? And so we're struggling with that acronym because diversity is a state, right? Inclusion is a process.
Yes.
And it's better, right? Inclusion is better than the state diversity. Let's look at the process of inclusion. But we want equity, we want belonging, we want access. These are the end goals, right? So I favor these three, these last three, and that's where belonging happens. That's really where B is a goal as well, right? Because when I belong, I'm going to be way more effective, way more innovative. I'm also going to stay, right? I'm not going to leave the organization. And that's I think where we need to get. Maybe a longer answer to sort of.
No, I love that. And that's kind of where my frame of mind was. And because as I started to listen to like when Jake was speaking, right, about all of the training that they're doing around unconscious bias and things like that, it resonated with me because, you know, the murder of George Floyd affected us in such a profound way if you are a person of color, while others who are not in the community were observing it, right? Seeing this human being being murdered at the hands of what is supposed to be authority, right? For us, I saw my son, AJ, you know, who is 6'1", African-American male, and I saw him on the ground. So when we talk about this community building and healing, we have to talk about the collective community trauma, right? That comes with it. So it's not just, and as we start to look at allyship and as we start to look at co-conspirators, if we're going to have this conversation about healing, we have to understand how traumatized some people are coming into it with, right? So you can say, oh my gosh, I really feel for you. When that happened, I literally, Bert, I have to tell you, had to stop taking phone calls, you know, because people were like, oh, Joanna, I'm so sad. And I said, you're sad? I'm scared. It's like a difference, you know what I mean? And you can remove yourself from it. And every day when my age is like, I'm gonna go outside, I'm like, okay, well, this is what you do when you go outside. How many people have to say that to their sons, you know, as they leave home? So when we're talking about this community building and healing, it's important that we understand that there is a collective community trauma that we have to acknowledge before we can even begin this coalescing. You know what I mean? So that's what I was thinking.
And the issue I have with corporates is it doesn't sound very corporate, right? What do you mean community building and healing, right? It's really the step. As you know, if you are linear, the step between the inquiry framework calibrating and where the solutions are going to come from. And so, yes, it is a corporate responsibility to look at community building and healing. And the question I often ask corporates is, you know, on a scale from 1 to 10, where do you think it's corporate's responsibility to attend to societal inequities, right? And the honest answers are like, well, no, that's society. Like, what do you mean? You know, I don't need, you know. But I was like, no, that's exactly where you need to be. That's exactly where you need to play. That is where belonging starts, that you attend to that. The other comment I wanted to give is that the very different experience, which my American friends are like, well, George Floyd for us was the last drop of the bucket. For lots of white people, it was sort of the first one as well. Like, oh yeah, this happens, really? And now I don't want to paint a picture of white people too bad. The fact that I'm white maybe allows me more to say that. But yeah, for lots of black people, it's like, excuse me, this has been going on for forever, you know. George Floyd was just more visible, and that kind of stuff. This has been going on.
In many communities, by the way, Bert, not just, I mean, you know, in the Asian American Pacific Islander community with, you know, their elders being attacked, in the LGBTQ plus community with transgender people being killed, right? But this is the first time it was on this very public, you know, platform that everybody saw. But so when people are like, oh, I didn't know, I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, and I kind of go, how could you not? But you know, there's a funny thing about, that's why I love this as an approach for leadership, because we oftentimes don't talk about empathy as in, I think that's a soft skill. Oh my gosh, that, you know, leaders, they all need to be taught that, right? And this idea of building and healing, we just need to make that part of the conversation, or else we're only having this very one-sided corporate safe, right? Because we don't get awkward, we don't get into the whole, oh, I don't feel too good about it. And I always say to leaders, it's okay to feel uncomfortable, but just because the conversation is awkward and uncomfortable doesn't mean you shouldn't have it. Right? So yeah, that's one. I love to see this, like I think Victoria said it earlier, all in one place, and the connectivity to it, right? The connectivity to it, so that we all realize that while we're doing some elements of it, there's a lot that we're not addressing.
Yeah, exactly. And I just put in the chat, not wanting to stop your flow. I love what you just said. Very powerful. You know, reframing soft skills as power skills, please, right? Because of the bias of the word soft. They're soft skills, you know.
I love that.
Skills, yeah. And again, the community building and the healing as a competency that I think, corporates need to attend to. It is a corporate responsibility because that is where belonging, not just the verbal commitment to belonging, but that it happens, it begins at community building and healing. Thank you, Joanna.
Oh, that's wonderful. Any other comments? I would love to hear. And I was just looking in the chat. Dr. Nisa Nadir, thank you so much. Yes, it is very difficult. And you talk about the intersection of also adding, being Black and in a Muslim community. And so powerful. But yes, I understand that anxiousness. And I think I have two of them as well. So I completely, resonate with your anxiousness and, fear as our men leave for the day. We just pray that they come back. So I would love to hear other comments. And thank you for that. I love that. And thank you for the idea of reframing soft skills as power. I love that. I just made a note of that. And that will from now on continue to call them power skills because that is powerful. Pun intended. So that's great. Other comments, questions, observations even, or aha moments as Bert was going through this that you thought, oh, or even things you didn't know, didn't realize, or that were new for you, new language, new terminology. I would love to just hear from those that are on anything that you learned today that you're taking away. I know this has been a quieter bunch. Usually we can't get them to stop talking. So this is, so I'm loving that, we're getting some comments. So any other comments? I see that
Yes,
Dr. has her hand raised. Yes.
Yes, she does. There we go. All right. Welcome.
Thank you. So yeah, I learned a lot today. I mean, I have been engaged in providing diversity education as a social worker for years. Didn't learn the terms of the tools in this way. So I've been doing things not knowing what to call them, I guess, So this was really good to kind of learn, how they're termed in this context. And then I'm excited about learning when to use certain tools. I've used them in my educating of future social work professionals. That was one way that I used them. I've used them in educating and training professionals who are already in the field as they work with clients. But this is another way of seeing them. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was the intersectionality as someone who's African American and Muslim. It was so interesting because my faith community is generally a source of comfort. But unfortunately, because my community is also very diverse and many are from other parts of the world, this was new for them. And so we talked about allies with people who I thought I was surprised that they needed to be allies. I thought they were already there. And so for many of us and living in Phoenix, it's a much smaller population. Being Black in Phoenix is small, and then being Muslim in Phoenix is small, and so all of that kind of came together. So it was quite an interesting time. And so I appreciated what you were saying, Joanna, and the ability, and I think that's where I found, I know I found that opportunity to relate and to resonate together and also to educate. But, that wasn't really a time to educate. Honestly, you needed to have people who were at a place where although there was a lot of educating going on, but, being so anxious and in pain even, it was a difficult time. So thank you both.
And then we've got, thank you.
All right.
Clyde, right?
Clyde.
Yes.
Yep, Clyde's coming back.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to thank you for today. It was definitely something that I can use in the future. It's just one more tool in my belt. It's pretty much a brand new tool. And I'm trying to decipher this stuff out and start using it in not only in my professional life, but also in my personal life. Because in fact, I have, I'm originally from Washington, D.C., and all of my family is back there. But out here in Phoenix, I have a completely different type of family and stuff. It's multicultural. It's all types of culture in my family out here, and so that this definitely is a tool that I can use, like as I say, in my personal life also. So thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing, Clyde.
Excellent. Bert, any last comments as we close out here and kind of wrap up our closing comments? That was amazing, by the way. I was like taking notes like crazy over here, which I love. And again, because I'm a diversity practitioner myself, I love when there's a new perspective on something, and that, you know, new tools that you can use. So I was just very pleased to be able to add some more tools in my DEI arsenal, if you would. So any closing comments before we close out for the afternoon?
Well, I think I spoke enough. I just want to thank everybody. I mean, the one thing I want to mention is sort of like, we see it as sort of a meta tool, if you want to, right? I think what we needed, what Joel, Amir, and I needed was really to look at, you know, how do we organize some of this thinking? It's complex, right? And we hope that from a meta tool, it helps to structure some of that. You know, what might we be forgetting? You know, because you know, it didn't work. Well, what didn't work? How come it didn't work? So I like using the word meta tool to sort of frame the rest of our work in. Yeah. So
absolutely. Oh, thank you so much for the wonderful. And by the way, I loved your sense of humor. I got it. So I was
not
with
tacky.
you.
You know, some of them maybe. You know, maybe some of them are a bit tacky.
No, I thought it was great. So thank you so much for that. I would love to have you all take the survey. And so Jackie has posted the survey link to share your thoughts about today's webinar. And again, a special thank you to Mr. Bert Vercamer for his timely and global perspective on inclusion. I really enjoyed today's presentation. Now, the work that we do here at DLA would not be possible without the important contributions from our volunteers, our sponsors, and our esteemed board of director members. I just want to recognize a few of them that are responsible for today's program. Of course, you met Tandra earlier, the head of our DLA Education Committee, and she and her team are responsible for the monthly workshops. And you've heard our voice in the background, Dr. Brent Scholar. Yeah, he is responsible for all of the technical movement that you see. We may make it look easy, but he's pushing buttons behind the scenes to make it all sort of seamless. And special thank you to Jackie Starks, who is also helping us on the back end with some of the questions and Q&A and posting things into the link. So we do not take you all for granted. Thank you so much. And a lot of the graphics that you see and the design that you see on our website is with our unofficial webmaster, her brilliance in terms of design work, and that's Maria Radloff with Via Maria. We just love everything that she does to make us all look crisp and professional on all of our channels, including our YouTube page. Now, we would not be able to do the work that we do without the support of our amazing sponsors. They help underwrite the programs that you see so that your attendance today here is complimentary. And so I just want to give a special thank you. I kind of mentioned it earlier to Mr. Marion Kelly, who was on from Mayo Clinic. He is one of our co-founders. And also a special thank you to Tegna Foundation Channel 12 and Miss Kate Morris, who is the GM there. They have been contributing to this webinar series for several years now. Now, we just have a small favor to ask. If you have enjoyed today's workshop, you've enjoyed the content, you learned something new, something that you feel will enhance your work, and I think he said it earlier, both personally and professionally, Clyde said it, would you consider supporting DLA a bit further by making a donation? And we're just asking everyone, if you've enjoyed this, go ahead and donate on our website. And I think Jackie will also put that link in there. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and your donations may be tax deductible. So please consult your tax advisor. But it's really important that we continue these vital dialogues and workshops, and that we continue to keep them complementary to the community, because as you know, the socioeconomic divide and gap is very real. And a lot of times our communities don't get the information because there's a hurdle of cost. So we want to make sure that it's always complementary to the community. So if anyone wants to attend, they can. And so the greatness continues, as you see there. We've got other workshops coming up, and we've got our great conference coming up. So on August 25th, we are going to talk about understanding the lived experiences and the language of Indigenous people. And the link is there to register. Then we move into September with actions speaking louder than words. And if you've heard Deanna sing, she was at last year's conference. She's amazing. She is going to be presenting for that workshop. And then we move into our conference in October, from October 12th to the 14th. And again, just a reminder, award nominations are open starting today, and they will remain open through August the 19th. And last but certainly not least, we've got our November 17th webinar already planned, and it is, do you want to be an anti-racist advocate? So we've got so many wonderful things. We're going to post all of those links in the chat area. Register early, pass it along to other individuals to register, bring students along. We just want to make sure that everyone has access to this. Registration is open, and more information is coming soon. Please always check the DLA website, diversityleadershipalliance.org, for more information. And then all of our webinars we have on our YouTube channel, so you can watch them later. So if you missed something that Bert said, give us some time to edit it, and get it nice and polished, and we'll have it on our YouTube channel for you to view and for you to share with others. A very special thank you, last but certainly not least, to all of you. I don't take for granted your time. I know it's the one commodity none of us have enough of, and we don't for any instance take for granted your participation. I want you to know that we do this work because of you, and we're always glad that you are here. So you have to let us know in the survey how you like this afternoon format, because the other workshops that I mentioned, both August, September, and November, are back to our morning format of 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. So I'd love to hear from you, how this afternoon worked for you. Do you find yourself a little more sluggish? You know what I mean? Not as sharp as you are at that 9 a.m., but let us know. We're always wanting to make sure that we are innovating and elevating to make sure we're meeting the needs of the community. We are so grateful for all of you. Thank you again for your time. Thank you again for your commitment. Thank you for helping to elevate DLA to where it is, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Cheers to all of you, and have a good day. Be good to yourself, be good to each other. Cheers.